2, 1. Welcome everyone to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Imy Nixon. Today is April the 21st. This is episode 65. And joining me as always from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Michael Wing. What is up, bro?
What is going on? It is episode 65 of the Raw Prospect Podcast. We are recording on a Wednesday night. We are going to cover some NBA. We're going to talk about the Western Conference. We're going to talk about how we think the playoff picture is going to shape out, and about some hypothetical playoff matchups and what we think of all these teams that are competing to be in the playoffs. I think we're going to talk a little bit about the play-in tournament as well. That should be fun. And then we're going to get into our first baseball segment of the actual season with just some mini power rankings. It's still very early, only 3 weeks in, but we're going to do some top 5 power rankings, and then we're going to talk about another thing, which is the Yankees, who were projected to be a betting favorite to win the World Series. And although it's early, they're really struggling out of the gate. So we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end. And that's going to be today's episode. And before we start, make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you like to listen or watch your podcasts. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and review, all that good jazz. And if you haven't caught our last episode, which I think we recorded Saturday or Sunday, that was a full first round alternating mock draft. Really fun episode. So if you're really excited about the upcoming draft, which occurs a week from tomorrow, be sure to go listen to that.
Right.
But let's get into this.
Right, exactly. And we've been waiting to record all day. We've tried to have the recording done and started at 4:30, and then we had to stop and because the internet was bad. So let's just get started here. So we're going to start here with the possible 1-8 matchups. And obviously this will also depend on how the play-in tournament turns out. But as of today, the 1-8 matchup would be the Jazz versus the Grizzlies. So the thing I want to ask you is, what is your initial reaction to that matchup in a possible playoff scenario?
Well, I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is Jaren Jackson Jr., who played a vital part in the Grizzlies' success last season, actually came back from whatever injury was nagging him tonight. I don't know what he's done or how he looks, but that's big for this Memphis team. He is a 6'11" forward who can shoot the three, is versatile, can play some defense. So if he comes back healthy or is back healthy, that could really energize this Memphis team and maybe could get them a game, maybe win them a game if Jaw goes off or something like that in the first round. But I think the Jazz are really good. I don't think that series would go past 5 games unless someone were to suffer an injury down the stretch. I know that Donovan Mitchell recently suffered an ankle injury that's going to keep him out for maybe a week or so. But I don't think that should hurt the Jazz too much. They have a winning record without him. I think they've only lost 1 game when he's been out. So I really like what the Jazz have done this season. Quinn Snyder has this team playing really well. If you look at just some of the metrics, they're first in all the NBA in net rating. They're also 4th in both offensive rating and defensive rating. And Rudy Gobert has also played a really vital part in this team's success. When he's on the court, they have a plus 15.7 net rating, which would rank highest in NBA history. And when he's off the court, their net rating is minus 2.3, which would rank currently 23rd in the NBA. So bottom 10 of the league. So he's really important to this team. Hopefully they can win some games down the stretch, maybe lock up a 1 or a 2 seed, which I think they will. But really, the playoffs are all about matchups. We say this time and time again when the playoffs come around and when we talk about the NBA. It's all about which team can accentuate its strengths and mitigate some of their weaknesses. That's the team that usually wins, especially when you're playing a team, 4 to 7 times over a span of a week and a half, 2 weeks. You got to find ways to play to your strengths and to mitigate your weaknesses. And I think, and maybe we'll talk about this a little later, but in terms of the Utah Jazz, the thing that everyone's worried about is, can they match up defensively with some of these elite wings that they may have to face out west? So when you talk about the Utah Jazz, I think their level of success come the playoffs will be dependent upon their quartet of wing players. We're talking about Bojan Bogdanovic, how he can match up against some of these other wing players in the West. Royce O'Neal, who's been one of their primary on-ball defenders against some of these elite wings in the West. Joe Ingles off the bench, that sort of thing. That's the overall consensus I'm getting from analysts, from everyone that I talk to about this Utah Jazz team is, can they match up with some of these elite wing players like Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, all those guys when they get deeper into the playoffs. But maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in terms of the 1-8 matchup, I think they'd be fine. I don't see that going past 5 games unless Ja Morant ends up doing something crazy or a crazy injury happens down the stretch.
Right. And I'm going to have to agree with you there. The thing that we've seen with the Jazz in the past, in the playoffs especially, is when teams can stretch Rudy Gobert away from the paint, that's when the Jazz aren't nearly as effective. When you have to have Rudy Gobert in the game, he's doing these drop coverages in the pick and rolls. Guys that can just shoot the pill can really air them out a little bit. And obviously this year they've been able to mitigate those problems a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see come playoff time if they have to play a stretch big like a Jokic or a who's another stretch big. There's not really many stretch bigs, or even a Jaren Jackson Jr. Or a Porzingis. Will he be able to be effective on the floor when he's not able to defend the paint? Because that's really the thing that he's best at. So that'll be interesting to see. Right. And then on Memphis side, this is a team that, they play so hard. This coach that they have, Taylor Jenkins, I believe. As soon as he showed up as the Grizzlies head coach, it just seems like they've just completely bought in. And now in year 2, it just seems like they're even a step further from where they were last year, even with the minimal roster improvements that they made. They still basically have the same roster, but they're able to be a lot more effective out there on the floor, which is really impressive to me. And Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to make a difference, but I'm just going to have to agree that I think the max it goes is maybe 6 games if something crazy happens, but my pick is going to be 5 games for that matchup. So another 1-8 matchup that could happen would be Phoenix and Memphis. So Phoenix is currently a game and a half back of Utah, and they just won today, so that might even be a smaller gap if I'm not mistaken. But they did lose the season series against Utah, I believe. So if they were to overtake Utah to get to the 1 seed, they can't be tied. They have to be they have to have the better record. So that seems a little bit unlikely this late in the season, but it's still an interesting conversation. So Phoenix and Memphis, what do you think?
This is tough. It's hard to get a good read on Phoenix, and the reason why is because of sort of the inconsistent play of one DeAndre Ayton. I think he's really the X factor for how deep this Phoenix team is able to go. But as of late, he's actually been really good. In the past 17 games, in which a stretch Phoenix is 14-3. I don't know about this. Doesn't include like tonight's games. I don't know if they play tonight or not. But in the past 17 games, he's averaging 17.5 points, 10.5 rebounds, 1.2 blocks, a steal, and he's shooting 70% from the field. True shooting percentage, that is. So he's been really good. It's correlated to a hot stretch for Phoenix, and I think this is what he's going to need to continue to do for Phoenix to go deep and really be a threat to get to the Western Conference Finals, and maybe, who knows, if an injury or two happens here or there, maybe even get to the finals. But I think that's unlikely. But in terms of a Phoenix-Memphis matchup, I don't know. It's hard to get a good read on that. I think Memphis could definitely get a game, maybe two, but I think Phoenix wins the series. That's really all I have to say.
Right, and I agree there also. I mean, Phoenix, the one thing that I'm a little bit weary of with them is actually their bench. The thing that they're really, really been good, the place where they've really, really been good this year is actually their bench unit. Their bench unit has a incredible net rating. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they've had a really, really deep bench. And as we know, in the playoffs, when teams go to shorter rotations and the bench units are comprised a little bit. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
The bench is not nearly as important in that type of situation. So my question would be for Phoenix is their starting five good enough to close games out and win those tough, close playoff games in a playoff scenario? And I think I would bet on Phoenix to win a lot of close games, just from the fact that they have two of the most clutch players in the NBA, in Chris Paul and Devin Booker. So I think Phoenix has a really good chance to go far because not only do they have two amazing closers, they defend well, and I think they also have one of the most underrated wings in the league in Mikal Bridges, who, I mean, I'm a Mavericks fan, so whenever they play the Mavericks, he's always shines bright because he's always on Luka, and he does an amazing job on those types of players, those perimeter talents. So I really like this Phoenix team. I think they have a ceiling of maybe the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's move on.
Right. Obviously, we'll get into some of the other possible 8 seeds a little bit later when we talk about the play-in. So with that, we're just going to move ahead to the possible 2-7 matchups. So as of today, that would be Phoenix versus Dallas. So I guess I can start off with this one since this is my team. I'm just going to say Dallas has been inconsistent, to say the least. I mean, we've had injuries on and off, and then we had that stretch in February where we were able to actually get some rest because we had a couple of games that were canceled because of the weather. And then once we got that rest, we were able to go on a stretch where we won a bunch of games. And now, through March and through April, we've kind of plateaued a little bit. We've stayed in that 7 seed range. And I think we have a good team, but it's just that we're not as efficient offensively, and we're not as good defensively as we thought we were going to be coming into the year based on the additions that we made in the offseason. So that's just all added up to basically being about this just as good as we were last year, but maybe just not as potent and maybe not having as high of a ceiling just because we're not nearly as good offensively. Like the flow isn't there. It just seems like there's a lot of stagnant basketball. It's just a lot of relying on Luka to make things happen. And that's just not a good way to win in the playoffs. And then Phoenix, we just talked about them. I mean, as for how they match up against Dallas, I mentioned earlier that Mikal Bridges, he does an amazing job against Luka. He's basically the perfect guy to put on Luka. He's long, he's strong, he has quick feet, and he has really active hands, and he's able to get up into you and stay in front. And Luka Bridges gives Luka a lot of problems. So in that series, I think it could go as far as 7 games if Dallas is able to figure things out defensively, but it could also be a sweep. But either way, I don't think I see Dallas winning that series.
So to be honest, I don't watch a ton of Mavericks or Suns games, or I haven't at least to this point. So my question to you would be, as a Mavs fan, this is my take. I think that Kristaps Porzingis is really the X factor for how far the Mavericks go. His stats look pretty good on paper. I mean, he's averaging 20.5 points per game, almost 10 rebounds at about 9.5, shooting about 48% from the field. That's not really the problem, the sheer production. My thing is like, what is your take on like him being a target defensively, especially for a team like Phoenix that has Devin Booker, all these good athletic wings. If he gets switched out onto one of those, I don't know how Dallas runs their defensive schemes. I'm not into the X's and O's, but like, how does Kristaps Porzingis fare defensively, especially against a bigger body like a DeAndre Ayton, maybe in the post or outside on the wing? That's just my thing. And it seems with Dallas, I have watched a couple other games. It's just kind of like I don't know if you sense this, but like a sense of urgency type. And I know it's tough because it's a long regular season, but not all the games really matter. But like some nights it's just kind of like a lack of a sense of urgency. And they're not the only team, but I just want to get your opinion on Kristaps defensively, because the offensive production seems to be there. And then kind of the sense that and it happens with my Spurs as well. Like some nights they just look lethargic. Like they don't come out with the necessary energy. And you have to when it comes to the playoffs. And I think these teams will, but I just want to get your thoughts on those two things.
Right. With Porzingis, I just say when he came back from his injury, I think it was mid-January, somewhere in there, he really, really struggled defensively for about the first month back. He was basically a liability. He wasn't shooting the ball great, and he wasn't able to move his feet well because whatever happened with his knee was still bothering him apparently. And that's when all of the trade stuff came out. That's when basically he hit a low point and the Mavericks hit a low point with him. Then confidence was kind of wavering. But then things kind of he made a little bit of a more of a commitment to the defensive end about mid-February when we got a lot of our guys back from the COVID protocols. And since then, I think he's been okay defensively. I mean, he's not going to be, a game wrecker in terms of being able to guard the pick and rolls. I mean, he doesn't have the foot speed for that. But in terms of post defense, I feel like he's gotten a lot better. His upper body strength, he's actually bulked up a little bit since last year. So little things like that make a difference. But I think just in the Kristaps Porzingis Luka era, I think that's probably going to be the biggest roadblock for us. Is just how are we going to be able to uh, build a great defense around Kristaps's weaknesses defensively?
Yeah, and I only bring that up because I've read a lot of stuff because that's what you have to do when you haven't watched a ton of these games. And there's a stat that I read. The Mavericks offense is actually better with only Luka Doncic on the floor than it is with both Luka and Kristaps on the floor. And the numbers prove that they have a plus 4.6 net rating when just Luka's on the floor, and only a plus 1.7 when both of them are on the floor together. So I don't really know how much
Right.
that actually matters, but that's the reason I brought it up.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dynamic between Kristaps and Luka right now because there was a little point in the season where Kristaps seemed to be a little bit frustrated with the touches that he was getting, where he thought he was open and Luka wasn't looking back to get him the ball. And I think
Right.
that also plays into his defense as well. Like whether he's involved also plays into his psyche in his confidence within the game. And that's one of the things I don't like about Porzingis is just when he's not involved in the offense, he's not able to keep the strong mentality and affect the game in other ways. And
Right.
that's one of the things that he's really got to work on.
These are two teams I would like to root for, and it'd kind of be unfortunate that they, match up in the first round. I do think it would be a really good series. I think it would go 6 or 7 games. I think either way you look at it, Luka's too good not to at least get a game or two.
Right.
And I think, I don't know, I just had this weird feeling that this series would go 7 games. Other than Chris Paul. Well, I guess both teams are sort of relatively inexperienced per se when it comes to the playoffs. So maybe that doesn't really matter too much. Although Chris Paul does have quite a lot of playoff experience, but I don't know. I'd say 6, 7 games. I'd probably pick Phoenix as of today. But, that could change in a couple of weeks. We'll see.
Right. And they're not a lock for 7 also. That's another thing to point out is the fact
Right.
that Memphis is right on their tail. And also with the win tonight, the Mavericks actually moved to a half game back of Portland for the 6th seed. So that's another interesting storyline to keep track on. So that, honestly, that's one of those matchups that as a Mavericks fan, I really wouldn't want to see, but as an NBA fan, I would want to see because I know it would be a good series. So with that, I guess we'll move on to our 3-6 matchups. Obviously, there's other scenarios with the 2-7s with whether Utah falls down 1 or if Portland falls down 1, but we might be able to touch on those a little bit later. But let's just move on to the 3-6 for now. So as of today, that would be the LA Clippers versus the Portland Trailblazers. What do you think?
This is tough. I am skeptical about Portland because they don't play any defense whatsoever. Their defensive metrics are absolutely terrible. They're 25th in opponents' points per game at 114.6, and they're 29th in defensive rating, which is also pretty bad, 116.7. Of course, we know about the pedigree and the past history of Damian Lillard. When it comes to the playoffs, we know what he's capable of. He can, score from pretty much anywhere once he crosses the half court line. He's ready to pull the trigger and shoot. We know about CJ McCollum, what he's capable of offensively. And we've seen it in maybe a couple playoff games in years past. But with the Clippers, it's like they're super talented. They may have one of the most talented rosters, maybe even the most talented roster in the league. It's just we saw what happened last year, like what happens in the playoffs. And I hate to bring this up again, and it seems like we bring it up every year now, but, we know what Kawhi Leonard is going to be, or we seem to know what Kawhi Leonard is going to give you on a night-to-night basis. But what is Paul George going to give you in the playoffs? He's, going on one of those Paul George hot streaks again. In the past 7 games, he's averaging 33, 6.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, shooting 54% from the field, 48% from 3, and the Clippers are 6-1 in those games. But the question remains, what do they look like come playoff time? So it's like the Blazers don't play any defense. The Clippers seem to always tighten up and sort of, I guess, choke come the playoffs. So what, this series could get a little weird in that respect. But I think the Clippers would win the series, probably about 6 games, given good play from Paul George and, not like last year against Denver or whatever, or whoever they faced in that second round. Just because of there's no one to really guard Kawhi Leonard on this Portland team. And you also have Paul George in that equation. And I think they're playing without Serge Ibaka right now. I think I read that somewhere. And maybe a couple other guys. So once they come back healthy, I think the Clippers would probably win this in about 6 games. But the only reason I'm really giving Portland, 1 or 2 wins is because Damian Lillard. But I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'm kind of with you there that the Clippers, obviously they have their questions and Portland has their questions as well. But from what I've seen this year, the Clippers actually seem a lot more cohesive than they did last year. They're moving the ball around better. Their offense seems to flow more. And that was really the biggest problem that they had last year. They didn't have that playmaking guard to facilitate and set the offense up for success. And now that they have Rondo has been really good for them, by the way. Surprisingly, he's come in and basically been playoff Rondo. As soon as he got in the building, he's immediately made an impact as a playmaker. And having him in there, I think that really makes a difference. So if you put that on top of the fact that the Clippers just simply have the better team, I mean, if you look at Portland, they added a couple of perimeter defenders, Derek Jones Jr. and Robert Covington, but they haven't really seemed to make a difference because
Right.
The fact is all of these teams just attack Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum because they just have a very undersized backcourt. And as long as they're together, there's always going to be defensive questions. And I don't see how they overcome the Clippers, especially them being such a tall team.
Yeah. I'm just not sure about Portland. Give them at least a game, just based off what Damian Lillard is going to do. But I think the Clippers. I do think they will play better come this postseason. I think they definitely are capable of actually finally getting to the Western Conference Finals, and depending on who they play, could maybe get to the finals. But we're a long way from that point. I'd probably pick them in 6, just because I think some weird things could end up happening in that series. But I'll have a better sense, once we actually get to the playoffs.
Right. And the Paul George thing is still yet to be seen. There's no way anybody can give an answer on that. Obviously, I think I heard that he hired a sports psychologist to help with his mental game. But, I mean, whether that makes a difference or not in the playoffs, we'll just have to wait and see. And also, another factor is that Kawhi, this is his last year on his contract, and he hasn't extended yet. So there's a little bit of that desperation factor that if we don't get it done now, he might book it. So.
Yeah, that's something to think about. But, we'll just say that conversation for another day.
Right.
So Denver is the 4 seed right now at 37-20, and the Lakers are the 5 seed at 35-23. So that would be the 4-5 matchup as of right now. So, Imy, what do you think? Given that LeBron and AD are above 80% healthy.
It's just hard for me to pick against the Lakers, seeing what they did in the playoffs last year. And obviously, right now, the fact that they're staying afloat without Anthony Davis and LeBron James, I think that just shows how good they are defensively. So if you throw LeBron and AD back into the fold, obviously the offense immediately gets a huge boost, and that defense gets even better. So it's just how can you really pick against them, especially against a team in Denver who just lost their second best player for the year, which, I mean, that was really unfortunate because seeing a MVP candidate go out in the first round, that's never fun. And that could very well happen this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. If LeBron James is healthy, which he will be, and Anthony Davis is anywhere close to 8 above 75-80% of himself, or anywhere in that vicinity, the Lakers, I think, will get to the NBA Finals. If you look at what they've done, and Anthony Davis is slated to come back tomorrow night, I believe. I believe against the Mavericks. They started a back-to-back against each other. In the 30 games Anthony Davis missed, they went 14-16. So they treaded water, kept their head above water, about 500, a little bit under. But that winning percentage without Anthony Davis, they had a better winning percentage without AD than the Pelicans do with both Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson healthy. And then the Wizards do with both Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal healthy. So they were still better than both those talented teams without Anthony Davis over the past couple of months. They weren't as good, obviously, without LeBron and AD. Without both LeBron and AD, they were 6-10. Without both of them, which isn't great. that really probably wouldn't be a playoff team. But given that both of them come back healthy, I think they definitely get to at least the Western Conference Finals and probably like 90% chance to get to the finals for a second straight year. But I think the more interesting team to talk about here, because we know what LeBron and AD are going to do once they come back, is the Denver Nuggets. I'll just kind of give y'all some stats to chew on, and you can make of it what you will. Obviously, just recently, Jamal Murray went down with an ACL injury. Hopefully, I think he had a surgery today, so hopefully he recovers, has a strong recovery, and comes back healthy next season, comes back strong. But since then, Nikola Jokic is obviously an MVP frontrunner, and his numbers have actually gone up. And this, could be a product of the fact that, he has to do more without Jamal Murray on the floor, but his numbers have actually gone up without him. He's averaging 29, 11 rebounds, almost 11 assists. It's just insane. On a 62.3% true shooting percentage. Losing Jamal Murray is going to hurt. Obviously, he was averaging career highs in points per game, assists, and true shooting percentage in that lineup they had since, acquiring Aaron Gordon from the Orlando Magic of Jamal Murray, Will Barton, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic. That lineup was playing absolutely out of their minds. They had a net rating of plus 34 over the 90 minutes they played together on the floor, which is just absolutely insane. I think their offensive rating was over 130, which is just mind-blowing. But now with Murray out, they've been going to a lineup of Monte Morris in place of Jamal Murray, Will Barton, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., and Nikola Jokic. And that lineup has actually been doing pretty well as well, just not as good. They have a net rating of plus 6 in a total of 26 minutes. And I don't know if these stats are updated, but they should be relatively close. So, obviously the Jamal Murray loss is going to hurt them. They're going to have to find ways to reincorporate some of that production. And I think obviously playing the Lakers, that's just a bad break. I mean, in a 4-5 matchup, who would have thought coming into the season? But I think now the play of a Michael Porter Jr. and an Aaron Gordon is just going to be all that much more magnified. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. It could be good. It could be bad. I err on the side of bad just because it puts more pressure on those players who don't have a ton of playoff experience. So it's tough. I don't know. What do you think about Denver?
Well, to me, it all depends on what they're able to do defensively. Because, I mean, whoever you put along the floor beside Jokic, as long as they're good cutters and they're good shooters and they have some skill, I mean, they're going to do pretty solidly. And I think Jokic has proven that no matter what lineup you put with him, you're going to have a good offensive lineup. The question is all about the defense, which, I mean, they've been okay defensively this year, but they've also been very streaky defensively. I think at the start of the year, they were actually doing really, really well defensively, and then that fell off a little bit, and then they went back up. So if they're able to find their defensive legs a little bit, I think they could give the Lakers a run. But I think if I'm Denver, I'm trying whatever possible to get to that 3 seed because you're only about a game back of the Clippers for that 3 seed. And the difference between playing the Lakers and playing Portland, that's
huge.
Massive. That is massive.
Right. Absolutely. They're only they're only about a game and a half out of catching the Los Angeles Clippers, I believe. So it's possible. You still have about 17, 18 games left. Just about under a month until the playoffs start. So there's still plenty of time. A lot of things can happen in these next 3 or 4 weeks. So we'll just have to see. But yeah, definitely, if you're Denver, you either you want to get to that 3 seed, so you don't, you can avoid the Lakers until at least the second round. But let's talk about the play-in now. Some of these other teams, and I think we'd be remiss if we don't start by talking about kind of the story of the NBA right now is Stephen Curry and what he's doing for the Golden State Warriors. So let's start there.
Well, my team is currently within the play-in bracket, and I am terrified of Stephen Curry right now. One thing that I realized when I was doing the research for this podcast is actually the fact that they're going to be doing it a little bit differently than they did the play-in tournament in the bubble. So it's 1-game elimination, and the 9 seed plays the 10 seed, and the 7 seed plays the 8 seed, and then the loser of the 7-8 seed matchup plays the winner of the 9-10 matchup, and the winner of that game gets the 8th seed. So
interesting.
The fact that you could be the 7th seed and miss the playoffs, it's sobering. Yeah. It's sobering. It's very sobering. And just all it takes is one 50-point, 10 3-point game for Steph Curry to just bury your season. So, yeah. It's scary. It's giving people nightmares.
So right now, that would be Mavericks, Grizzlies, and Warriors, Spurs. Oh man.
Yeah.
So yeah. Now, obviously, if you follow the NBA, you know what Steph Curry has been doing, at least in the month of April. Some people thought that we saw the peak of Steph Curry during that MVP run in 2015, 2016. Those were the years, and now he's kind of into his 30s. He's playing without Klay Thompson. He's getting all the attention defensively. Draymond Green isn't really what he used to be on offense, at least, so he's not getting a lot of help there. Kelly Oubre's talented, but in the games I watch, he seems inconsistent. With James Wiseman going down with injury, unfortunately, another injury. That's another storyline for another day, but he just doesn't have a lot of help. And so what he's doing right now is all that much more impressive, because he's really the only threat on a night-to-night basis, like consistent night-to-night basis on this Warriors team. This Warriors team is terrible otherwise. Like, take Curry off the court, they're probably the worst team or one of the worst teams in the league. And we obviously saw it, just last year. So I don't know if they played my Spurs. My Spurs are kind of in the same situation where it's like a lot of young players who play well on some nights and some nights don't. So I don't know. Maybe we could Pop, maybe he pulls something out of his ass. I don't know. But, with Curry right now, you just don't want to mess with that. I honestly think that's sort of a coin flip. If Curry is doing what he's doing now or somewhere even close, I think the Warriors probably win. But if he kind of cools off a bit, I do think my Spurs could win that game. Derek White is playing better now than he was a couple weeks ago, coming off that foot injury. So that's big for my Spurs. But I don't know. I like to think that the Warriors would probably win that game. And then the Mavs Grizzlies, man, I don't know. I'll save that for you. What do you think?
Well, I'm gonna comment on Spurs Warriors first here. Um, I think the Spurs are still just brutally underrated. I mean, the way they played against my Mavericks stuff about a few weeks ago. I mean, they really lock in defensively, and then they go on these runs. That's the thing about the Spurs. They hang around a little bit, like they hang around and like maybe they're down 8 or they're down 6, and they go on these big runs. Sometimes it's Patty Mills, sometimes it's Derek White, sometimes it's Lonnie Walker, and it's like a different player every night, but it's always somebody. And they've been playing really, really good basketball lately, and it's going under the radar because of obviously because of what everything Stephen Curry is doing. But I mean, if you're talking about the Spurs, I mean, you can't mention the Spurs without DeJounte Murray, who's, I mean, arguably the best defensive point guard in the NBA. I mean, he's not going to stop Steph, but I mean, he'll at least give you a guy who's got some length and the athleticism to try and chase him around a little bit. So
Right.
if there's any matchup that you might have a shot at containing Steph, it would be that one. So I think that game is still would be pretty tough to pick, especially if
Yeah.
Steph cools off a little bit like he did tonight against the Wizards. He didn't have a good shooting night. So back to your question you asked me about the Mavericks. Uh, that's a coin flip game. We beat the Grizzlies, obviously, in Memphis earlier this year with that huge buzzer beater. Luka hit that floater three-pointer to win the game, obviously.
Yeah.
But the thing about that game was the fact that the Mavericks had no business winning that game. I mean, we played awful that whole night, and we just happened to stay in it because of Luka and his just heroics. So, to me, I think I would pick the Mavericks, and I would feel good about it just simply from the fact that we have the best player on the floor, and in a win or go home type of situation. I mean, not exactly win or go home, but something like that. In that type of situation, I mean, I mean, win or lose, I'll put my money on Luca.
Yeah, I would too. I would too. I'd favor the Mavericks as well. But man, if that sort of format change, it's different than last year. That makes it like I think somebody, one of the owners or someone, maybe it was even Mark Cuban
Yeah,
said
it
like
was Mark Cuban. Yep.
this is kind of I don't know what it. Don't quote me, but like it's like this is sort of like I don't know what did he say. It
I
was
think he
something
said
along
that it was a big mistake or something like that.
yeah
And
something
then
like
Luca
that.
said the same thing about a couple days later. And then a lot of people
Yes.
were joking about the fact that at the time we were slated to play the Warriors, and everybody was joking like Cuban and Luca are seeing Curry in their nightmares and yada yada yada. So, I mean,
Well,
I don't blame them.
I don't blame them either. I don't blame any team for seeing Curry in their nightmares right now. So yeah, it will it'll be fun. I can't wait for this, especially in the West. We will get to the East maybe in our next episode, I believe. So, um, do you have anything else you want to talk about before we move on or transition?
Well, there's the conversation about whether the play-in tournament is, I mean, completely fair. I mean, do you agree with the play-in tournament being a thing? Basically, I mean, we just touched on it with the argument that Mark Cuban made and Luca made, but what do you think about the play-in tournament's effect on the NBA?
Well, I think it's obviously going to be good for revenue streams and for viewership. just because of the high stakes entertainment value that it will provide. But from a team perspective, I can understand why, especially if you're a team like the Mavericks, or even, I don't know, the Trailblazers, who knows, could fall into this situation as well. If you're a team that's worked so hard to get to this point, it's kind of like, I view it as kind of like the wild card in baseball. Like, you win 90, 95 games, you work so hard through this marathon of a season, go through injuries and all of that to get to this point, and all of a sudden you're in a one-game elimination that could, go either way. Tons of things can happen, weird things can happen in sports. So from a team perspective, I can understand why they wouldn't like it, but I think it's good for the overall. And I didn't do any prep on this. I'm just going off the top of my head. I think it'll be good for the viewership and the revenue streams of the NBA. So, maybe there's other ways you can do it. I do think it's a fun thing to do. I think it's a good way to get more, like, I don't know. Fans want more nowadays, and this is a good way to give it to them. But from a team's perspective, it might not be favorable. But from an NBA perspective, I really like it. That's just my simple answer. But what do you think?
For me personally, I think I'm for the play-in tournament, just simply from the fact that we get to these later portions of the year in the NBA a lot of times, and we realize, oh my goodness, half of these games don't even matter. Like
Right.
most of these teams are just tanking now, and now that we have the play-in tournament and 10 teams get a chance at the playoffs, you're seeing teams like Washington and Chicago and teams that really wouldn't have had a fighting chance get to fight for the playoffs, and they're really competing, and Washington, they're on a 6-game winning streak right now, I believe, and I don't think they would have felt the need to try and push that hard to get in position if it was just in the regular 1-8 playoff format, given how far back they were to start the year. So I think it gives the chance to showcase the stars that may not typically be on national TV, like
That's another.
a Zach LaVine or a who else? John Morant, not really on national TV much. DeMar DeRozan in the Spurs too.
That's another good point that I didn't really think of spontaneously, is that a play-in tournament, especially when you include a 9 and a 10 seed, it may incentivize those teams that may otherwise just hang it up on the season otherwise, to maybe push for one of those spots so they have a chance. I guess it might incentivize more competitiveness amongst those bottom feeders, like the 11 and 12 seeds of the world, to try and make a push late in the year to get one of those spots. With the changes they made to the draft lottery, it's not easy as just having the worst record automatically gets you a number 1 or a number 2 pick. That's not how it works anymore. So that's not a strategy that's as effective now. It's just completely giving it away and tanking. But I think the play-in tournament may work in that way to incentivize more competitive games down the stretch, and that's what you ultimately want. But we can get deeper into that at a later date. It'll be very fun to watch. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But with that, let's move on and let's talk some baseball.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. As you said earlier, we will be doing our top 5 in the power rankings, and we're also going to have a little mini segment on the Yankees. That's your favorite team, obviously. So you're probably going to have a lot more to say than I will, but I'll give my little uh, bits and pieces here and there of my thoughts. But let's get right into this. I'm excited. This will be basically um, our first you said it earlier too. I mean, this is our first baseball segment of the season. So, okay. Uh, do you want to go first?
I want to hear your thoughts first.
Ooh,
Uh,
okay. Okay. I okay. So my list from 1 to 5, I actually was a little bit torn on who to put 5, and you'll see in a second why. There's a bit of a bottleneck in that
right.
range. So I have the Dodgers at 1, Padres at 2, Red Sox at 3, which I don't know how I feel about that, but I mean I think 3 and 4 are kind of interchangeable. And then I have Milwaukee at 4,
Good one.
because I looked at some of these stats, and Milwaukee actually has a plus 24 net rating, and um, I mean that's pretty comparable to uh, where the Dodgers and the Padres are at. So, I mean, I feel pretty good about that top 4. And then the 5th spot, I mean, you could give it to like the Reds or one of these 500 teams that might like be better later. Like, I mean, the White Sox. I mean, they're dealing with a bunch of injuries right now. You could even give it to maybe the Mets. I mean,
Yeah.
they have 2 pitchers with ERA under 1, which is insane. So you could really give it to any of those teams.
Yeah. I have a similar list. I think now that like, in case you don't know, the Oakland A's got off to a horrendous start.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I'm not like all that worried about my Yankees yet. We're sitting at 6-11, 5 games under 500. We just split a series with the Braves. We won last night, lost tonight. So it's not, all that bad record wise. But like the A's, they started 0-6. And people are already asking themselves, like, wow, is this team like, have they already given away their playoff chances? But they've won 11 straight games. They're sitting at 11-6. So I think I'd probably slot them in to the number 5 spot just because they're hot
Mm-hmm.
and they're going on quite a winning streak. Number 4, I think I agree with you. The Brewers, their pitching has been absolutely fantastic. They have one of the best players in baseball, and Christian Yelich. I think that lineup's been pretty good. Offensively, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I'd probably go them or the Reds 4. I'd probably err on the side of the Brewers because the Reds pitching has been sort of shaky early on. Their ace, Luis Castillo, has been struggling. So I'd probably go to the Brewers. And then I have the Padres at 3, the Red Sox at 2, and the Dodgers 1. The Dodgers is really not arguable. You can't argue against that. They're on pace for 126 wins. 126 wins. Obviously, that probably won't sustain itself. It's a long season. Injuries happen. You go up and down. But they're going to win probably close to 110 games, anywhere in that range, and maybe be considered one of the best, baseball teams we've ever seen. I mean, this collection of talent is unbelievable. The run differential, and this doesn't count whatever happened tonight, but the run differential is plus 38, by far best in Major League Baseball to this point. And their starting rotation, they have like 3 aces alone in their starting rotation. Their second in starting rotation ERA at 2.66. And Clayton Kershaw, Trevor Bauer, and Walker Buehler all have an ERA under 2.5. Kershaw in 4 starts has a 2.19 ERA, 24 strikeouts to just 3 walks. That's an 8-to-1 ratio. Fantastic. Bauer, who they brought in the offseason, was their big free agency pickup. He's gone 4 starts, 2.42 ERA, 36 strikeouts, 6 walks. That's a 6-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio, which is still really good. And then Walker Buehler, he's only gone 3 starts. I'm not sure if he maybe played tonight, but he has a 2 flat ERA, 12 strikeouts, only 1 walk. That's a 12-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio. So all those guys have been good. And then you have, 4 and 5 starters in Dustin May and Julio Urias, who actually pitched some big games in the playoffs for them last year. I mean, when you have that rotation, 1 through 5, and they all have an ERA under 3, or under, I think it's 3, might be 3.5. You're in really good shape. So the Dodgers, it's really inarguable at this point. I put the Red Sox 2, just because I wanted to go best team in the National League and best team in the American League.
Mm-hmm.
Although the National League is a lot better than the American League. But, the Red Sox, they're off to a good start. Their pitching has been a lot better than a lot of people expected. Maybe that won't sustain itself. I hope it doesn't, because I don't like the Red Sox. But, yeah, credit to them so far. It's been really good. And their lineup, they lead the league in a lot of offensive categories. They lead the league in batting average, hits, runs scored, slugging percentage, and OPS, which is on base plus slugging percentage. So, yeah, they're slugging, they're hitting home runs. The offense is spearheaded by 2 of their younger stars. Well, JD Martinez isn't really young, but he looks like the 2019 version of himself, or 2018 version when they went to the World Series. He's batting .375 with 20 RBIs and 6 home runs. And then Xander Bogaerts, who is like the young star that they, hoped would rise up to the occasion once they traded away Mookie Betts. He's been actually really producing early on. .393, 7 RBIs, and 1 home run, with a .439 on base percentage. So really good from both those guys. The role players are sort of filling in timely spots. And then the Padres, the record doesn't really show it, but they deserve to be in this spot.
Right.
They actually lost a weekend series to the Dodgers. It was a 3-game set. They actually have another series coming up this weekend. So, and I think the game Sunday night is going to be televised on ESPN. So if you get a chance to watch some of that, do that. These are 2 probably the best teams in baseball. The Padres, they actually lead the league so far in starting rotation ERA. So all those pickups they had in the offseason with Yu Darvish and Blake Snell and all those guys, it's paying off so far. Their starting rotation leads the league in strikeouts. Joe Musgrove, who was supposed to be their number 3 starter, actually threw a no-hitter about a week ago. So when your number 3 starter can go out there and throw no-hitters, you're in good shape. The offense hasn't been as good as I thought it would be early. Tatis missed a couple games with the shoulder injury, and he's kind of gotten to a slow start out of the gates, but I don't expect that to continue. I think he's going to heat up here pretty soon. But Manny Machado, their third baseman, he's been great. And Eric Hosmer, one of the most underrated players in the game, their first baseman, has also been fantastic. So, I mean, a lot of these teams' records don't really reflect how bad or how actually good they are, unless you're talking about the Dodgers. just because it's early and that's the way baseball is weird. But yeah, I think those are the clear 3 best teams so far.
Right. And
You have,
I definitely agree with you there. And one thing I wanted to say about the Dodgers is, I mean, they're getting all-star production from their, I mean, a pick they made in the 33rd round a few years ago. Zach McKinstry. I mean, he's playing amazing right now. A 26-year-old rookie that they called up from the minors, and he's just out there just. I mean, I don't want to
yeah,
say balling because I don't think
it,
that's the term for baseball, but
it
I mean,
it
you get
seems
the
that
point.
at this point, it seems anyone they bring in or bring up to their big league roster plays. They play well like right away. We saw it with Walker Buehler a couple years ago. We saw it with Dustin May just I think last year or the year before that. I mean, anybody they bring up seems to work. It's just kind of the way this organization is run. It's why they've won 8 consecutive NL West titles and have gone to the World Series for however many consecutive years. Obviously, winning it last year, but some people put an asterisk on that because of the shortened season. But I think it was definitely a legit. They were definitely the best team. The Rays obviously had a good run, but Dodgers were a better team. I think it's legit. I'm not in that camp of people, but there are the fair share of Dodger haters out there. So, yeah, this is probably going to look insanely different in about 2 weeks. That's just the way baseball works. It's still really early. Injuries happen. You get hot, you get cold, until, July and September, we're really not going to know like who has separated themselves from the pack. And that's when the playoff picture will really start to take shape. But as of right now, that's where it stands. So unless you have anything to add, wrap this up with a quick Yankees segment.
Yeah, this really just feels like a continuation of our season preview. I mean, the teams that
Right.
we thought would be good have played pretty well. Other than the Red Sox, who I mean, I didn't really see them coming, but I
Yeah, I
mean,
didn't either.
I mean
But
this, yeah,
they brought back. I mean, Alex Cora served his cheating suspension last year in the shortened season, and they got him back. They got their manager back, a guy that a lot of guys in that clubhouse, not a locker room, got to sort of learn the baseball terminology.
right.
A lot of guys in that clubhouse are comfortable with him. They trust him, even though anybody outside of Boston doesn't really like him at this point. But yeah, I think he's a good manager. I don't think he was really. I don't know. It's arguable what his role was in the cheating scandal, but we know what happened with the Astros, obviously. But it's questionable, like how Alex Cora was involved in that. But that's another conversation for another day. Let's talk about the other end of the spectrum right now, and that's the New York Yankees. As far as the Yankees are concerned, I don't think many fans in New York at this point in April would be saying, thank God for the New York Knicks. That's what
Right.
people are saying right now.
Yeah.
That's how bad the Yankees stink right now. I think the Knicks have won 8 straight games, 9 straight games, something like that. They're hot. The Yankees suck. People in New York are saying, thank God for the Knicks, because otherwise, what do they have? The Mets are decent right now, but, it's eh. So, but in terms of the Yankees, the first thing is, and this is something I never thought I'd say, and probably they never thought they would even come across, is the lineup. The Bronx Bombers aren't hitting bombs. They're not hitting. They're bottom 5 in a lot of the offensive categories. They're last in slugging percentage. They're 25th in batting average. They're close to the bottom in home runs to this point, only 17. That's like 28th or 29th. They can't seem to manufacture anything when they do get runners in scoring position. They can't find those timely hits. It's sort of swinging for the fences, boom or bust type deal. Their offense is absolutely horrendous. They're bottom 5 in runs per game. This is a team that, regardless of some of the pitching struggles they've had in years past, they've been able to rely on this vaunted lineup, this offense, to kind of mitigate some of those pitching problems that they've had in years past. And to this point, it's been bad. Like they're not hitting with runners in scoring position. They're not even hitting home runs, and that's sort of supposed to be the strength of this team with guys like Aaron Judge, Gary Sanchez, Stanton, all those guys. They just don't look good at the plate. They don't have an approach. I don't know what it is, but they need to turn it around fast. I'm not quite worried yet because it's so early, and with one swing of the bat, you can change the fortunes of your season. Really, guys will eventually figure it out, but the saying goes, you can't win the World Series in April, but you can lose the World Series in April. And if this continues into May, it's gonna go from concern to panic. If this continues into May, and there's still like 5 or 6 games below 500 come Labor Day, it's definitely gonna be panic time in New York. That's the biggest concern. The lineup, and I never thought I would say it, isn't hitting at all. There's been a couple of good moments. DJ LeMahieu has been pretty good. A couple other guys have gotten hits at times, but they just haven't been able to string together hits, timely hits, all that. The starting pitching, it's been okay. Garrett Cole's been great, obviously, but the guys behind him, they brought in Corey Kluber, who's a former 2-time Cy Young Award winner with the Cleveland Indians. He's been not really what I thought he would be. Although he's older, I thought he would be able to come in and be a solid number 2, because that's really all the Yankees need behind Cole. It's just a solid. They don't even need like an ace. They just need something solid behind Cole. They traded for Tyone. He has upside, but he hasn't really looked good up until this point. Severino's hurt. Herman hasn't been good. Montgomery's been good, which is, I guess, okay. But, it's just kind of all over the place. A lot of question marks aside from Garrett Cole. And then the bullpen has been pretty much the savior of this team so far. I think they're first or second in bullpen ERA. So the bullpen's been great. And when they're up, you're not going to really have any chance once they get that bullpen. Once they go to that bullpen, it's going to be tough for teams to manufacture runs. That's just how good the bullpen is. But right now, if the Yankees go down, and I saw it tonight, they went down 2-0 against the Braves, and the game was over. Like, once you get up a couple runs, the way this lineup is struggling right now, you score 1 or 2 runs, the game is over. Like, the Yankees have no hope. It's unbelievable. Hopefully it gets better. I think it will, hopefully, but I don't know. The good thing is nobody's really gotten hurt yet. They had a couple of guys get hurt in spring training, and those guys are still working their way back. But nobody's actually gotten hurt in the course of this 3 weeks of the start of the regular season. So that's my little rant. Basically, it's a lot of question marks aside from Garrett Cole, and the worst lineup in baseball so far that can't seem to get it going. So we'll see.
That's pretty interesting to me because it seems like in years past they've had the boomer bust type of thing as well, but not
Right.
nearly to this extent. So I'm
But
not
those teams were able to fall back on the fact that they knew that they were going to hit a lot of home runs, and they
right.
knew that, and they're not even doing that right now. And if those lineups were slumping a bit, it was usually only a couple guys. They usually had one or two guys that they could rely on to get big hits. Right now, it's the entire lineup that's not hitting, and that's really the thing that is like outstanding or surprising to me, is I never thought like they would struggle to this point. I think a part of it is nowadays, the advantage always goes to the pitcher because, and we can talk about rule changes that baseball needs to make maybe in a future episode. But one of those is I think they need to move back the mound a foot or two. I think that would help the hitters with, the high velocity and the high spin rates that pitchers are pitching with nowadays. It would give the hitters a little bit extra time to see those pitches and to square them up. But, I'm not a baseball nerd. I've just listened to a couple podcasts that have talked about the changes baseball needs to make to kind of ingratiate itself with the younger audience. That's kind of the knock on baseball, is they can't seem to attract the younger audience. But yeah, it's just weird with the Yankees right now. I don't know, you can't put really a finger on it as to why they're struggling at the plate. And I do think it will eventually change. They just have too much talent to not eventually break out of this, and I think they'll be fine. But as I said, if we get to if we get to May and they're still sitting 5-6 games under 500 and they still haven't shown any signs of life offensively, it's going to be panic button time in the Bronx. But we'll see.
Right.
We'll see.
Right, exactly. I'm not really sure what what the normal thing is in baseball, but I mean, in every sport that I've watched, I've seen a ton of good teams have slow starts to the season and still end up in great position by the time the playoffs begin. So
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't worry too much, especially since the season is so long.
Right. And there's a historical precedence of teams that have this exact sort of start. When the Yankees won the World Series in 2009, they started 5-9, and they're sort of a historically slow starting team. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not as worried about the record, because you're sitting things below 500. The Yankees historically dominate the Orioles. They have a 4-game series against the O's next. If you sweep the O's, you're right back at 500. You're fine. But I'm more worried about the actual intangible play on the field. That's what you have early in the season. But yeah, as you said, there have been teams in the past that have started slow and end up in a great position at the end of the season. So like the Nationals a couple years ago, they were, I think, 15 or so games below 500 going into the All-Star break. They come out of the All-Star break, go on a run, get to the World Series and win it. That's just what can happen. It's an extremely long season. But yeah, I'm not worried about the record. I think they'll be a playoff team. But they got to start hitting, and they got to start hitting fast, or else that hole could get too deep.
Right.
You don't want to let the hole get too deep because then it becomes that much taller of a mountain to climb. But yeah.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think that's gonna do it for this episode, guys. Thanks for watching, and I mean, I have nothing really else to add here for the baseball segment, but all I want to say is just stay tuned for our next episode. We're obviously gonna finish up that NBA topic with the Eastern Conference, and then maybe we'll have some draft stuff, maybe because it's about a week away right now. So
Right.
that'll be our last episode before the draft. So stay tuned for that. And to close the episode, I'm just gonna say we just started a Patreon, and that's patreon.com/raw prospect pod. If you want to go support the channel there, support the podcast. All the funds that we make over there is going to be put back into the show in order to grow the show, get better equipment, better setup, things like that. So if you like the content we make and you want to support, we'd really appreciate that if you went over there. And also, one thing we'd like you to try is maybe share the video with a few other people, if y'all don't mind. If you know any sports fans out there that like basketball, football, baseball, all the sports we talk about, we want to grow this show, and that's one of the main ways we can do that. So if you could share that with share the show with a couple of people, we would really appreciate it. So with that, y'all, that's going to be it for episode 65. Peace out.
Peace.